Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Night Drive Week 3 podcast. I'm Josh Welge. I'm here joined by Steve Soucie. Steve, how you doing, man?
Not too bad. How are you, Josh?
Doing well. We are almost 1/3 of the way through the regular season. Ouch. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm going to treat it as we still have a few months until Thanksgiving weekend rather than that first comment.
Yeah, it's speeding along. I mean, it feels like we literally just got started yesterday, and here we are talking about a third of the season being done after this weekend. So definitely moving along quickly, but there's been a lot of activity so far to keep things interesting.
It definitely has been. We're going to be looking ahead to some of the top games in Week 3 later on in the podcast. But first, I wanted, so it's a good time to discuss, looking ahead at potential playoff projections. Steve, of course, you got your updated projections. That's on Friday Night Drive on Wednesday as we record this. And just kind of looking at it, some of the, besides the projections part, one of the themes that I know you had touched on is just kind of the sort of pendulum, the swing of the middle classifications, I believe you characterize as it. And one of the factors being just the volatile nature. I think there's something like 23 new teams in your projections today, which I think you said is actually not that huge of a number. But besides just the teams coming in, teams coming out, swap in, swap out, there's some other reasons behind the movement. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, when you look at what goes on, a lot of times, when you have those new teams swapping in and swapping out, it tends to be in the same classification or very close to it. Like you might have a 6A team moving out, a 5A team taking their place. But the one variable where that isn't as consistent is in the Chicago Public League. And like we've talked about before, that's kind of the hardest group of teams to figure out early in the season. You don't have much data. You don't know that much about them. So there tends to be a lot of switching out in the first couple of weeks of the projection of those teams. And the one thing that's different about public leagues schools that is different from almost every other conference in the state is you could have a 7A enrollment-wise public league school playing in the same division in the public league with a 2A school. So if you're swapping those schools out, then the line starts to move around. And when the line starts to move around, a team shifts up a class, And when you have over multiple classes where that's happening, then it tends to show that we're changing things very much in those middle classifications, 4, 5, sometimes 3 and 6. But 4 and 5 tend to have the most movement. And the one thing that really jumped off the page at me this week with the projection, for the first time that I can ever remember, I had a school with an over 1,000 enrollment projected into the 4A field, and I can't recall that ever happening before. And that was kind of a confluence of all those things coming together to lead to that conclusion. We've already noticed a trend of typical 6A teams moving towards 5, but typical 5A teams moving towards 4. But that was a really stark signal to me that I think we're definitely going to have some classical 5A teams slipping into 4. I think, and it's almost a lock at this point for some of those schools that you think are 4A, 5A bubble riders. Those schools are going to 4.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about schools like Rochelle, Morris, and then the higher than upper class. I mean, Cary Grove. I feel like I always associate them with 6A. They could potentially be 5A. Yeah. I know the other factor too is that sort of added another variable into this is the whole multiplier change this year, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this too. We looked in the years past. There's usually 20 to 25 schools that are multiplied. There are close to 70 that are now multiplied because you now have to apply for the multiplier. And to be frank, I don't know this for sure. I haven't gotten this verified. I've tried to get it verified. I'm not so sure that very many schools actually went through the process of applying for that waiver, because I think there are some schools that probably would have gotten it that don't have it. So we've got, when you go through it, you've got nearly 70 schools. You've even got schools that are, I mean, for technical purposes, that aren't even playoff eligible that got multiplied. So that shows me that the fact that we are no longer automatically giving schools multiplier waivers, and you have to actually apply for it. There were some schools that didn't do that. You've got some schools that are, expected to possibly make the playoffs in this projection that did not apply for that waiver that may have gotten it. Well, they're at that multiplied enrollment. So schools that would have been 4 or 5A with that multiplier waiver in place are rocketing up to 6 or 7 because they've been multiplied. So in the past, usually you would have 8 to 9 Chicago Public League schools projected into 4A. There are currently 3. So that kind of shows you the difference, because if you're talking about 1 or 2 teams that are no longer in that north bracket in like a 4 or 5A, it changes the whole landscape of the draw, because you're usually used to a north bracket in 4 or 5A having 6, 7 Chicago Public League schools, and it pushes the whole line of the north-south divider down. Where you've got schools that you would think would probably be in the north bracket getting pushed down by Chicago Public League schools. That opens up the whole bracket to a whole bunch of different possibilities. Teams possibly ending up in the north bracket that are typically in the south. So there's just a lot of different permutations of what's going on now because of those multiplier factors and the fact that we've just got schools, with much different classifications than we're kind of used to seeing them.
Absolutely. A lot of good stuff. Again, you want to check out Steve's latest projections on Friday Night Drive. It's there right now with his analysis and the bracket projections himself. Want to bring in our Joe Aguilar from the Northwest Herald, kind of break down some of the action around McHenry County. Joe, how you doing, man?
Good, guys. How you doing?
Doing good. Is there any truth to the rumor that you're at Hallis trying out to be the Bears kicker?
hey, Josh, I couldn't do any worse than Cairo Santos. I'll tell you that right now.
Kind of doing a little bit of a, worlds colliding. Want to check out Joe's work on our Bears podcast and Bears coverage. Michael DeWojak, a lot of good stuff. Joe, getting back to high school football, what we hear about. One of the really good stories out of McHenry County through 2 weeks. Got to talk about McHenry. Yeah. The Warriors, man, that's an athletic program that I, of course, associated with really good baseball and a really good baseball. But they're 2-0 now. I think it's the first time since 2007. What do you make of the Warriors?
Yeah, it's nice to see. I think part of one of the fun parts of the high school football season, I think you guys will agree, is always seeing which team is going to surprise people. Like you're so used to, well, they've been not good for the last few years. And sometimes it just takes that 1 or 2 guys, difference makers in your program, and all of a sudden, maybe at that time they're seniors. You got a really good football team. I don't necessarily know if that's the case at McHenry, but I do know they have some new blood there. They have a new head coach, young guy, Colton Nero, who's a Crystal Lake South graduate from the Fox Valley Conference, which McHenry plays in up here, and he's got them 2-0. They had 2 wins last year, which was 2 more than they had the year before. They went winless. Made a coaching change. Nero had been on staff there a couple times, once a few years ago, and then he left to take the job at Stag and did okay there. And then came back to the area, and there was an assistant on the under levels last year, so he gets the job in the off season. They got a couple guys who have been playing varsity ball for 4 years, and you talk about the baseball team, Josh. The quarterback, Jeffrey Schwab, who was a starter in right field, real fast kid, real athletic kid, can throw. He was a starter in right field for the team that took second in state this year. So he's the quarterback. He's been a running back before. And, confidence is a funny thing. I mean, you get a couple. They had a rally week 1. They beat Dundee Crown, which was not great last year either. And then last week they get another victory. So confidence is high there. You need that. I don't care who you're playing. You can be playing a bad football team. And when you're a bad football team too, you need W's. You don't want to be playing IC Catholic in a non-conference game if your program isn't ready yet for that kind of challenge. But so far, good for McHenry. And now they got a real test this Friday. They got Cary Grove, which is 0-2. That's the team that went to the semis last year, won state undefeated 2 years ago in 6A. So this is the real test for McHenry.
Yeah, how does 2-0 McHenry against 0-2 Cary Grove sound? That's not a sentence that you hear very often.
No, maybe
right
never,
now.
right?
Yeah.
And we'll see about Cary Grove too, because they're kind of becoming an interesting story too here. And I've written a lot about Logan Abrams. We talked last week on the pod, Josh and Steve, about him. To me, I mean, he's a game-breaking talent. 2 years ago, as a sophomore, rushed for 1,600 yards when they won state. 26 TDs, big, strong kid, 6'3", 215, a good linebacker, but didn't play offense. I don't think he played fullback last week either. So I don't know. I hate to speculate about injury. We talked, I think we did last week about the Linz Frank injury he had last year. It ended a season. I don't know if that's still an issue. I hope not, because he's good for football. He's a good football player. And, if they don't have him running the ball on offense, because I think he's a game breaker, I don't know how much they have. They have a young quarterback, a sophomore, Jackson Barrett, who's good. He'll get better. But right now, I don't know if they have the game-breaking talent. Again, they're going to get their wins too. But this is interesting. I don't know if Cary Grove, beats him handily. McHenry come Friday night, but I'm really interested to see what plays out in that game. We'll find out how good is McHenry and how good is Cary Grove, because right now I'm not sure about either team.
Joe, you talk about teams going out and scheduling themselves in a non-conference. In the Kishwaukee River Conference, they had some pretty good non-conference wins last week. Richmond Burton, they beat Coal City. Marengo, I think they're 2-0 now for the first time since 2016. Probably the most exciting finish in McKinney County last weekend, with Johnsburg blocking that field goal at the end to beat Addison Trail, which was kind of an interesting game. Addison Trail being a larger school, a school that's been in the playoffs the last couple of years. That was a very good win for Johnsburg.
It was, and it came in an unlikely fashion. You mentioned the block kick by a kid named Jacob Vetter for Johnsburg, and Addison Trail had looked, from what I saw in the videos, like basically a chip shot field goal for even a high school team. And he got his big paws up there, both of them, and blocked the kick to preserve a thrilling 7-6 final. You don't see too many 7-6 finals. Right. And the funny thing is, Johnsburg is a real good offensive team. They returned their quarterback and wide receiver from last season when they didn't score single-digit points in any game last season. Johnsburg went to the playoffs with Carter Block as the quarterback. Ryan Franz, who's a junior wide receiver, not the biggest kid, but he's a good slot guy. Great route runner, and really sure-handed. He had 66 catches a year ago. I think he's got about 12 or 13 this season. But for those guys not to be like non-factors, that speaks highly of Addison Trail. I wasn't at the game, so I don't know what Addison Trail was doing to shut those guys down. But like, that's one of the most prolific QB wide receiver duos up here in Block and Franz. But 7-6. Now they got a big game Friday. I'll be there. Johnsburg is home. Their beautiful turf and lights, which they did last year. They got Richmond Burton, which has owned this conference. Mike Knowles won everywhere. He's one of the best coaches the state has seen. I don't think that's hyperbole. Mike Knowles really, really good at what he does, and he wins everywhere he goes. So Richmond Burton goes to Johnsburg, and Richmond Burton, you mentioned, had that big win over Coal City. The guy who covered the game for us was talking about Mike Knowles. Like, they haven't had that kind of win in a long time. That one you can, like, who have you beaten? Well, we beat Coal City. That's a perennial power, small school. And so that was a good win for Richmond Burton. We'll see if that confidence. I don't know if they really need confidence. I mean, they pretty much handled this conference last several years, but they also lost to Johnsburg last season with a 1-touchdown game. So there's a lot of different scenarios playing out there. Friday should be a good one. Richmond Burton at Johnsburg Friday.
Yeah, a couple good games in the KRC. I mean, that Marengo plays Woodstock North. Woodstock North is 1-1, but week 2 they played IC Catholic Prep. No shame in losing there to IC Catholic. Now they go back into the KRC. So a couple good games there. And back in the Fox Valley Conference, Joe, I think I read in your McKinney County notebook that there's 4 2-0 teams in the Fox Valley Conference, and they all play on the road this Friday.
They do, kind of an interesting tweak to that. We'll see. Prairie Ridge, to me, I think they beat Cary Grove opening night. They have the best player through 2 weeks, and you know how we like to do that early. Week 1 of the NFL, who's the MVP? Right. It's like, let's pump the brakes a little bit. But certainly Luke Vanderweel, who we talked about last week, 2 games, 4 touchdowns in each game. 7 are rushing. He had a pick 6, which was a really momentum-changing kind of play in the Jacobs game last week. Prairie Ridge had its home opener, but he's the real deal. I mean, he's just dynamic. elusive. And so they hit the road. Gosh, Josh, I don't have in front of me. Who do they play again? I forgot. It's one of the Crystal Lakes, I think. Maybe Hampshire. I think maybe it's Hampshire, which snapped a 9-game losing streak last week. And we talked about like what confidence can do. Maybe Hampshire, those kids are probably thinking, hey man, let's go shock the world. I mean, what do we have to lose? Everyone's expecting us to lose. Let's go knock off PR and Luke Vanderweel. So that'll be interesting too. And then Huntley was down 21-0 to Dundee Crowd, which again, Dundee Crowd, they're not very big. They didn't have a great season last year. Huntley, big school. They got a lot of athletes there. And they were down 21-0 Huntley. They won in overtime. So interesting to see, like, again, how good are they? They're 2-0 too, but it's that's why we play the games, right? It really is fun to see like who's like legit and who's like maybe they weren't that good after all. We always have those teams everywhere, and that's always kind of fun to check out week to week.
Good stuff. That's Joe Aguilar. He covers McHenry County football for the Northwold Herald. Joe, thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks, boys. See ya.
Soucie and I are going to look ahead to a lot of the really good Week 3 matchups when we come back. But first, a word from our sponsors.
I'm State Representative Steve Reich. Since 2017, I've led the fight to reform our child welfare system and supported educational choice for every kid in Illinois. I've worked to stop the collapse of our public pensions while standing up for businesses that are being crushed by crippling mandates. And I've never forgotten who pays the bill. The work isn't finished, and as I run for re-election, I'm asking for your support. I'm Steve Reich, and I approve this message.
SGKR Injury Attorneys tackles the toughest cases. I'm Matt Rundio. When life throws a flag, we go on offense to protect your rights. Don't get sidelined. Score a touchdown with SGKR. Visit us at sgkr.law.
At Oliver's, we are proud to serve our community. We serve up great customer service, quality products, ease of shopping, and we serve up delicious barbecued sandwiches at our fundraiser cookouts. So stop by Oliver's, 748 North Brenton and Dixon, and help fund our local clubs and events.
In Illinois and into Iowa, the story of Shaw Media is a story of trust. Since 1851, we've been informing, connecting, and reflecting the communities we serve, large and small, rural and urban, suburban, and river towns alike. With dozens of local newspapers, radio stations, magazines, and specialty brands like Friday Night Drive and Starve Rock Country, we meet people wherever they are. We shine a light on local government. We celebrate Friday night touchdowns. We tell the stories that shape your day, from neighborhood heroes to the Chicago Bears. But what truly sets us apart? It's our people. The award-winning journalists, broadcasters, and storytellers who live here, work here, and care deeply about what matters most to you. We don't just report the news. We're part of the fabric of the places we serve, from the Mississippi to the Illinois, from the Fox all the way to the chain of lakes. Trusted for generations, still earning it every day. Shaw Media, your most trusted local source.
Back on the Friday Night Drive Week 3 preview podcast. Josh Welge here with Steve Soucie. And Soucie, I think I read in your look ahead to some of the top games this week that'll be on Friday Night Drive on Thursday morning. I think 162 teams come into the weekend with 2-0 records, of which 50 play other 2-0 teams. First of all, is 162, is that a large number going after 2 weeks, or what do you make of that?
It's a little higher, very small. I believe I looked it up. It was 158 the year before. I think it was 152 the year before that. So I think right now what you're looking at is just kind of a quirky way that some of the schedule broke for some of these teams in regards to maybe a few more, but it's not very much out of the ordinary at this point. I think personally, for me, I think what's really interesting is you start to look at some of those 2-0s, and quite a few of them are playing 0-2s that are really, really good and can't afford to get to 0-3, and that's where I think it's kind of intriguing. There are like I said, there are 50 teams, 25 games between 2-0s, but when I start looking around, like I'm looking at that Joliet Catholic Fenwick game, for example, and against the 2-0, Joliet Catholic really can't afford to go to 0-3 with the remainder of their schedule, so that's a big game. I mean, there are just a bunch of other ones out there that are kind of sitting there where I mean, that 0-2 I'm pretty confident they're a really good football team, but they're only going to have so many chances here to right the ship before it becomes a dire situation for them. So that's the list that I'm interested in expanding on. That they're not necessarily 2-0s, but teams like Marist, Wheaton Academy, Cary Grove, Downstate Mount Carmel, Hersey, all teams that are 0-2 right now, that with what they have left on their schedule, they're really playing with problems if they don't get a win. And almost all of them across the board that list are playing a pretty darn good football team in week 3. So, the 2-0s are interesting, but for me, some of these games are, who is a 2-0 playing? It may not be a 2-0. It might be a 1-1 that kind of needs it, or an 0-2 that really needs it. So how many of these 2-0s are going to survive? I'm of the opinion that will probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of, there are 25 guaranteed losses in that group. I bet you there's at least 25 or 30 more from some of these teams that are underneath 2-0 right now that really need that win.
Yeah, that Joliet Catholic Fenwick game is one that I think we're all going to have our eye on, because not only does Joliet Catholic need to win that game to get that win, but, man, what a tricky spot to be in. They have to go on the road to a good Fenwick team that's 2-0. That would, let's be honest, another Catholic League school, they'd like nothing more than to shovel a little dirt to Joliet Catholic right now and put them in a tougher spot. So that will definitely be one I'm keeping an eye on this Friday. Another match from the Catholic League, not between the 2-0, 0-2, but a couple 2-0s. Maybe the glamour match of the weekend. Nazareth playing Mount Carmel, defending state champion in 5A and in 7A. Tell you what, Souce, I think Nazareth has got a really good team. I think when it's all said and done, they're going to be a factor in whatever classification they end up with. I'm just curious to see how much they can hang with Mount Carmel. I feel like Mount Carmel is in a really rarefied spot right now that I'm not sure how many teams can hang with them for 4 quarters. We'll see.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that we're going to be wrestling with for most of the season. And I was talking with Michael O'Brien from the Sun-Times at Saturday's Glenbard West Joliet Catholic game, and he looked at me and he goes, I think St. Rita played really well last night. And I'm referring to the week 2 game against Mount Carmel. And, and I was watching that. It's not the same thing as being there, but I was watching that, and I kind of got the same vibe. But they weren't really in that football game because that's how good Mount Carmel is. So I think a lot of times you're going to be measuring a win or a loss against Mount Carmel. You're going to measure how competitive were they able to make it. I think that's what we're dealing with here. Like, I honestly think that, aside from maybe Loyola, I would be surprised if I would be stunned if Mount Carmel lost a regular season game, and really surprised if somebody takes them to the wire. That's how talented I think this roster is.
Yeah, no doubt. And I will say about Nazareth, I was a little bit wondering about them after week 1, and then what they did to Morgan Park, who I really liked after week 1, that kind of put my antenna up a little bit about how easily they were able to beat Morgan Park last week. Obviously, now Mount Carmel, that's a whole different animal this Friday coming to their place.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that you kind of were wondering about Nazareth. How they lost some incredible talents from that team to graduation. How quickly would this group gel? Was it going to be another situation like we've had in the past with Nazareth where they kind of dug themselves a hole and have to dig their way back out? So for them to already be sitting here at 2-0, going into a Mount Carmel game that I'm sure they would love to win, but not having that feeling of, oh man, what happens if we lose this game and then we're 1-2, we're 0-3. 2-1, if that's the way it plays out, is a lot easier to breathe after 3 weeks than looking at a schedule like they would have at 1-2 or potentially 0-3. So they've already made some pretty significant strides. I wasn't sure that they'd be this far along this fast. I have a lot of faith in that program and their ability to be the kind of team that you absolutely do not want to face in October or November. But it looks like they're already clicking in a way in September that maybe they haven't over the last couple of years in regards to being ready to roll in one of these week 3, week 4, week 5 games instead of when we're talking about them in week 10 or week 11.
Another matchup in the Catholic League of unbeatens, however, not 2 2-0 teams, a 2-0 versus a 1-0. Loyola playing St. Francis. Soucie, kind of a weird matchup in that Loyola did not play a week 2 game. Week 1, they didn't play an Illinois school. Week 2, St. Francis did not play an Illinois school. And now they play each other to open up the Catholic League. And then on top of it all, last year, St. Francis went up to Loyola and beat them. So a lot of stuff going on in this game, but a couple teams that I really, Loyola in particular, I really need a little bit more data on.
Yeah, Loyola right now is still very much a mystery to me. The fact that they really had to scratch and claw to get a win in week 1 over Maryville, and then in week 2, I'm sorry, that was Valparaiso. In week 2, they didn't play at all, so you just don't have a lot of data on them. You don't really know where they're going. It's just kind of an interesting game with Wheaton St. Francis. I mean, Wheaton St. Francis went up there and beat them. And surprised a lot of people. I think Loyola is probably looking to avenge that loss, even though obviously it's a lot of different kids. But, I still don't really know for sure what Loyola is. A lot of the rankings and the accolades that are going to them is much more of a nod to what they've been than what we know of them right now.
Another matchup, one of the matchups I really have an eye on being out here in the western suburbs, Hinsdale Central playing at Downers Grove North in the West Suburban Silver. Both teams enter in 2-0. A lot of storylines on this one. First of all, Hinsdale Central, a couple really good non-conference wins to start the season to get to 2-0. They're trying to get back to the playoffs. They played Downers Grove North. Downers Grove North 2-0 as well. Kind of a thing, curious what's going to happen this week is their star quarterback, Owen Landsu, that's going to Minnesota. He left the game in the first quarter of last week. So kind of curious to see the status of him. And then, these are two big rivals. And last year, Downers Grove North knocked him out of playoff contention in week 9. So a lot of stuff going on here. I think I'm going to learn a lot more about these teams after this week.
Yeah, it is a very interesting early season game. I think we're going to get a lot of those in the West Silver this year. It's just one of those situations where Hinsdale Central giving you a real good read right now, but I'm not really sure about how good those two teams are right now that they've beaten already. They've done a nice job. They've beat who's been put in front of them, but I don't want to say I'm skeptical. I do think they're a good football team, but now we get to find out how good, what degree of good are we talking about here. I think they put themselves in a nice position right now to at least start thinking about a potential postseason slot, which is something they haven't had for a couple years. So that 2-0 start puts them on a really nice path. But obviously in that conference, no rest for the weary. You don't have weeks off. So, this is a game right now that could really be a plant your flag type of win for Hinsdale Central if they were able to get it. And for Downers Grove North, you still are like, hey, can they get through this gauntlet unscathed? Where the problem area is going to be for them, we're going to find out. Like I said, this is a quick one. This is one that comes right up early in the conference schedule.
Yeah, I feel like Hinsdale Central, while they didn't make the playoffs last year, I felt like they were getting closer last year. They played some of these topper echelon teams in that league a little bit closer. They got to within a couple of touchdowns of Downers Grove North. So I felt like they were almost there. The question is, are they there to the point where they're going to beat teams like this? I mean, they got Downers Grove North this Friday. Then they go to Lions next Saturday. So I think we're going to get a really good read on the Red Devils after this week, after the next 2 weeks, actually. Not necessarily a West Suburban Silver, but sort of there's parallels. They're not parallels. There's relations. Another 2-0, Glenbrook South, Barrington. Glenbrook South, one of the more impressive week 1 wins, beating York in overtime. Now they get Barrington. That's a fun matchup. Look forward to seeing what comes out of this one.
Yeah, it's two teams that you're trying to get a better read on early in the year. Barrington always plays a pretty interesting non-con schedule before they get into their league, which is also pretty competitive. So, getting a read, Barrington tends to score a whole bunch of points, and then they like to get into, race on the scoreboard type of games with you. So, Glenbrook South, a team that I've always felt is pretty solid, but they're just trying. I think that York win kind of perked up my radar on them and said, well, okay, maybe we're ready to take another step beyond just being, maybe, an interesting team in the North Suburbs up there, but not one that you consider to be like a threat to go really deep in the playoffs. Maybe they're trying to transition and say, hey, we're over here, we're ready to get some stuff done. Because like I said, that York win, granted, York had a lot to replace. It was a week 1 game, but you have to look at it from the perspective of, hey, maybe there are some teams ready to make that next big step, and maybe Glenbrook South is one of those teams.
You mentioned taking the next step, and back in the Catholic League, Brother Rice this week, they play St. Rita. Brother Rice is a team that they've had a lot of talent the last few years, and, I feel like a team that can maybe even take the next step and maybe get to a state championship game. Now with Mount Carmel moving up to 8A, maybe that happens in 7A. They had a really impressive week 2 win, beating Marist handily, and now they get Rita.
I think Brother Rice would admit that if you really asked them about it, that they maybe underachieved over the last couple of years based on some of the talent that they've had. Early exits in the playoffs. Some of it was draw related. I mean, there have been some times where they've got some really ominous draws, but I think for the first time in a really, really long time, obviously the list of teams that can win 7A has expanded, because the primary threat to winning 7A is no longer in 7A. So Mount Carmel, with them moving up, you've got, I would say there's 6 to 8 teams that feel like they have a very legitimate chance to get to Illinois State, compete for a state championship. And I think Brother Rice is a very, very high on that list, to be completely honest with you, based on what they've done so far, the talent that they have on that roster. I think that they are a team that if they can simply get through their schedule, without too much damage being done to them, because like every other Catholic League team, it's a heck of a gauntlet. But for them to be 2-0 now, have an opportunity to go 3-0, sit there and be not in a situation where they're sweating out whether they're going to be a 5-4. Maybe the bar has been changed to 7-2 or 8-1, so they've got a higher seed, so they can stay away from a first round matchup against a really good team. Because that's seemingly what has been happening to Brother Rice over the last couple of years. They end up getting into the playoffs at 6-3 or 5-4, end up with a 21, 22 seed. And while you might get one okay draw there, odds are you're going to run into a pretty high seed pretty early if that's the seed that you draw into. So if you're that high seed instead of being one of the lower seeds trying to be an upstart, the bracket becomes a little bit more easy to maneuver. And I think the opportunity is there for Brother Rice to possibly do that this year.
Yeah, one more matchup I want to touch on before we get out of here. Fascinating matchup. The matchup might have lost a little bit of its luster. Lena Winslow going to Rochelle. Lena Winslow lost to Stockton last week, but still, Lena Winslow, powerhouse at a 1A the last several years. Now they go to Rochelle, who's more 4A, 5A. I'm really curious to see how Lena Winslow can compete with a very good Rochelle team.
Yeah, a little surprised last week. A little surprised. I know Stockton's a good team. I was surprised that Lena Winslow took that loss, because they simply just don't lose very often in the regular season. It just doesn't happen. I think you have to go all the way back to 2022 to find a regular season loss for Lena Winslow. So Stockton did that in dominating fashion. So it give a little pause whether or not Lena Winslow is at the level that they've been at before. But kudos to them for seeking out this game. I think originally they had a team from Wisconsin or Michigan somewhere that basically backed out on the game that was a little bit closer to their size and enrollment. But instead of just going, hey, we'll just we'll take the bye week or whatever, they agreed to this Rochelle game. Rochelle, a very solid program in the 4A, 5A type ranks. So it will be interesting to see how they're able to match up, if they're able to match up with a team like Rochelle, who has done a really nice job of simply, of being that kind of team that nobody really enjoys playing all that much, because they do things the right way. They tend to be a really formidable football team. So, yeah, a different type of non-conference game that you don't often see on the schedule here with that one.
And kudos to both of those programs for coming together for a game like this. Just before we get out of here, any parting thoughts in week 3 and just kind of what you're going to be keeping an eye on Friday night and just sort of the overall tenor of week 3?
I don't know if week 3 has the the big headline firework games all over the place like the previous 2 weeks have had. But what I do think they have is a lot of games. I would put it somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 50 games where if you take like a 30-second grab at it, and you look at it, you're thinking to yourself, hey, this one could really, really turn the pivot of a season for somebody. Like you get that win, then you start believing, hey, maybe big things are on our way for us. You take a loss in one of those situations and maybe slide from 1-1 to 1-2. Then you've got a big uphill climb. I just think this is a really big pivot week in regards to doing the things that that you have to do to get yourself where you need to be 3 or 4 weeks from now, where you're in great position to get yourself a playoff berth, or maybe on the verge of clinching one, or if you're going to be scratching and clawing for the rest of the regular season, because that's where we're at right now. It's once again, third of the season done already after this weekend. So you really take stock of where you're at and what you have to do to get where you want to be.
A lot of good stuff coming up here on Friday Night Drive or Friday Night Football. A lot of good stuff on Friday Night Drive. A lot of good podcasts. I was listening to Steve and Mason Schweizer earlier today talking about Kankakee area football. Tomorrow, JT Petaldy and Eddie Griffio will be back talking about South and West area. And then, Steve, you'll be back Friday night with Matt Rodewald for a live stream with highlights and analysis and our game reports and all that good stuff. So a lot of good stuff coming up. Until then, we're going to get out of here. For Steve Soucie, I'm Josh Welge. You all have a great Wednesday afternoon and a great week 3.